Okay, so I'll tell you the piece we're going to do today. Actually, it's three pieces, but two of them we'll get through today. And there's a third piece written in Sefer Bereshis. So I actually photocopied a piece from Reb Yaakov from the Ksav Yad, and I discussed it with Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky. I copied it. We'll soon see for what reason, but let's first go through the piece in Sefer Shoftim, chapter Hey, Pasuk of Gimel, and there.
So that's not from this week. That's not what you sent this week.
I did. That's what I sent this week.
Shoftim. Oh, I see. He's
Yeah,
writing.
Risha Dalet.
Okay.
Dalet, exactly. So I just want to get to Shoftim and show you. In Dvora's Shira is one of the most interesting one. I hate to say it, it's more interesting than Moshe Rabbeinu's Hozir Shir. Now, it could be Moshe Rabbeinu's Hozir Shir has more deep things in it. I assume it does, right? Because it's in the Torah. But hers is so interesting in the fact that she criticizes certain tribes and she blesses certain tribes. In other words, you really see the nitty-gritty of Israel's society in her Shira. Okay? So in one of the places, she says like this, Oru Auror, I skipped. Oru Meroz, Omar Malach Hashem. Cursed is like from Oru Meroz, which means curse Meroz, Omar Hashem Malach Hashem. The messenger of God said. Not 100% clear who that means. Does it mean Dvorah? Does it mean it says Omar? So some people learn on Barak, the one who was the head of the armies. Oru Yoshveha ki lo bo le'ezras Hashem bagiborim. Its inhabitants, Merose's inhabitants, should also be cursed because they didn't come to help God. Okay. When he was Kilu, God was fighting because the Jewish people are fighting, so Kilu, God is fighting, right? And that's why the article translates it in their Tanach. Curse Meroz, said the angel of Hashem. Cursed are its inhabitants, the inhabitants of Meroz, for they failed to come to aid. Here he puts in parentheses the nation of God, but the Gemara says since the Jewish people are fighting war, it's like God is fighting the war. To aid the nation of Hashem against the mighty. Okay? So the question is, and the Gemara raises this question already, who is Meroz? Now, we know when she criticizes different tribes, we know who they are. It says which tribe. She talks about Dan, Ruvain, and it's critical of them. She doesn't. She asks questions about, why they didn't come. Did they really come? But Meroz, she actually curses, that's a strong language. So Rabbi Yaakov speaks about this Meroz, and he says Pirish. Pirish Rashi. That's on the left column already. Reish Dalet. Oru Meroz Amri la Kochava. The Gemara Moed Katan says there are those who say that Meroz is a star, a planet, a kochav, right, a star, and others say it was a important person, like a leader of one, in the tribes, or a leader within the Jewish, or I think some of the Rishonim they learn. I don't remember. Maybe it's Rashi that he was a general. And he didn't show up, right? Which reminds us a little of October 7th, right? Some of the generals didn't show up, right? He was near, Rashi says, the place of the war, and he never showed up. Yoshveha hayoshvim ba'arba'a meshalo. the people, even the inhabitants, right? Rashi learns Hayoshveh, the ones, the inhabitants of the place where he lived, Hayoshvim ba'arba mishalo. They get cursed because they're sitting in his 4 cubits. What does that mean? The whole Gemara over there, Moed Katan, as you know, discusses the whole issue of Nidui, Cherem, right? And by the way, they learn from over here that a lot of the halachas of Cherem from this Orome Rose. Okay? At kan Lashon of Rashi. Mashapirish Rashi Yoshvim B'Dalet Amishalo Koi Leman Dama Gavra Chashiva Hava. Obviously, when Rashi says, "Cursed be the inhabitants," right? In me Yoshveh HaYoshvim B'Arbash, the ones who dwell within the 4 cubits of this Meirose general, because they also means if they dwelt in his 4 cubits, they weren't keeping to the cherem, which Dvorah was putting on him. And so it's not really a curse in the sense like, you get one of these curses on somebody, what do they call that curse that they put sometimes on the prime ministers? I forget. No, they call him a rodef, but the curse they put on is something.
Pulsa denura,
right? So it wasn't really that; it was a cherem, and anyone you're not allowed to go in the Dalet Amos of someone who's in cherem. Okay, so he says that's going according the fact that Rashi says it's referring to this
trying
general.
to find someone now to handle it. I don't know who.
Avo Lamanda Omar Kochava Hava, that it's a star, right? And she's cursing the star. Mashmasha Yoshvea Hainu Toshavea Kochav. Now it says Orume Rose, which is a star, according to one shot in the Rashi, and then it says Oru Yoshvea. So Rashi says, so Reb Yaakov says, then Yoshveh is the ones who dwell on the star. That there are creations that are living, right, that are not part of our world. Kadur Oretz means around Earth. Okay, that's what Reb Yaakov says, because you say Or Yoshveha, so it must mean the inhabitants, which means that Meirose, which is a star, has inhabitants. I just have to tell you that when Reb Yaakov told this to me, he said Meirose is, of course, Mars. Meirose, right? So that's the way Reb Yaakov said it. He didn't say for sure it's Mars, but he said it sounds like Mars. Now, when Reb Yaakov told me this, I think we already sent rockets to Mars, right? Rocket ships to Mars. Am I correct?
No.
Oh, we didn't yet?
We haven't sent anything that we sent to the moon, but not to Mars. Thanks.
We haven't done anything with Mars yet?
No, we haven't.
We've done a lot. Yes, we have.
And
non-manned.
There's nothing manned in Mars, but plenty of robots have gone to Mars, including rows that have crawled all over the place.
What did they report?
There's no life, but there could have been life a long time ago.
Uh-huh.
And there's still, by a long time ago, we're talking about, billions of years.
No.
Before Dvorish and Avia.
Exactly. way before that, right?
Okay, so we're going to talk
in the Art Scroll timeline.
Okay, but Rabbi Yaakov was not wrong in the diuk, in the pasuk, right? Because it's Oru Meirose, Oru Yoshveh. So Rabbi Yaakov says, now, Reb Yaakov was going to talk about this hashkafically. Uve'emes loch patli im kayamim bruim ba'alei chachma milvad ha'adam. It doesn't bother me if there are existence of creations that are wise creations besides man. Va'afilu yosem mefutachim meitanu, and even more advanced than us. Sheichom l'shloach mesarim eleinim. They can send certain communications to us. Rabbi Yaakov says, I don't mind that. And even if their wisdom is like the famous malach who's called the Ashmadai, he's a very wise malach. How do you know he's very wise? Because the Gemara tells that he was able to sometimes outsmart Shlomo Melech. He was Shlomo Melech was Chacham Mikol Adam, so he's the Ashmedai, right? Actually, they have if I'm not mistaken, they have an expression in Yiddish, klug v'dima Ashmedai. He's smart like the Ashmedai, because that Ashmedai has a name to be very smart.
Rabbi Yosef brings in the footnote.
Oh, he does?
Yeah, 129.
129. Oh, klug v'der Ashmedai, right? That's why we have that pitgam, right? Rak she'elam bechira. The most important thing is that they don't have bechira. Okay, that's where Reb Yaakov says they can't have free will. Habrim alolu, these creations, habrim alolu, yichol lios ma'od charutzim. They can be very much charutz means advanced, right? Right. But whatever they do, like a malach, they have to do. It's their teva. There's no free will. Muchrachim. It's a must. Kemo shadvorim ein yichol lachlit litzor dvash im ktsat ral. Just like the bees can't decide, you know what? The people are taking our honey, so we're going to create a dvash which has a little bit of poison in it. In order, man can't take the dvash, right? They can't do that. They can just do what they were, set up to do. What they were set up to do, that's what they do. Kamo, shachavish, and yocholarog, dover acher chutz mi kurio. A spider can't weave anything except his spider web. If you ask him to weave you a suit, he can't do that, right? Kach im yesh b'chalal od beruim, and thusly, so too, if there is in the halal means in the universe, right? Od creations, harei she'ein bali b'chira. They're not bali b'chira. Okay. Now, I know that as soon as I heard this from Reb Yaakov, I said to Reb Yaakov, "It can't be that." He says, "Why not?" I says, "Because if they don't have bechira, so how could she be cursing them for not coming?" Right? So we'll talk about that. Okay. V'zem muchrach ki abriya haisa avur Yisrael she'anu bechira hat yitzira. And this is mukhrach. It must be that the creation was for the Jewish people, that we are the elite or the chosen of the creation. That's what Rashi says at the beginning, right? Bereshis bara lo nivra olam ela b'shvil Yisrael b'shvil haTorah. V'lachein hayachas beineinu leveinu olam hu k'mo shekosav ha'mesilas yisharim. Sha'olam nivra l'shimish ha'adam ve'imu nimshach achar ha'olam misrachek miboro hareu mitkalkel makalkel ha'olam imo. Right? The Mesilas Yesharim says the world was created for the use of man, which means, of course, everything, all the stars, the planets, the animals. Right? Now we may not know how they serve us, but that's what the Mesilas Yesharim says, that the whole world was created. So obviously, the stars and the moon also. Maybe eventually we'll figure it out. Science will figure out why you need the stars and the moon. Maybe they have figured out about the planets already, why they're necessary for us. If he is drawn to the world and he distances himself from God, then he mitkalkel makakel olam imo. V'imhu sholet batzmo v'nidbak beboro u'mishtamesh min ha'olam rak lios l'siyua lavodas boro. He only uses the world to help him for his service of God. U'mis'aleh ba'olam atzmo mis'aleh imo. That's the famous Mesilas Yesharim. Nimtza she'ein od bruim ba'olam balei b'chira shekiblu Torah mi milvadenu. There is no creations in the world that are Bali Bechira, that Shekiblu Torah, that they will Kabul Torah, because if you're Bal Bechira, it would make sense that God would give Torah. So there's no other place on earth where they got a Torah, not on earth, in the world, in the universe, that got the Torah. That's what Reb Yaakov says. In other words, that's the only thing that would bother him if they would land on Mars and there would be a base medrash there, and guys would be learning. The Reb Yaakov would be in deep trouble. Okay? But Al Titar Lomar. Oh, 1 second. Before we get to that, I just want to read for you, because what?
Chabad was already there.
well put. Right. But I mean, Jonathan, have we figured out today more than before what are the purposes of these planets and stuff, how they help us in any way, or we haven't?
Well, it depends what you mean by help. I mean, it's the laws of science which created us also create the universe as we see it, including everything, the stars, the whole business, the stars, the galaxies. It's all a result of the laws of science which Hashem made. Could have Hashem made the laws of science different so they wouldn't be there? I don't know. Nobody knows. Okay, but laws of science which Hashem has given us, okay, do result in what we see.
But in other words, what we see. So can I look at those planets and say, in some way they're helping Earth? Because that's what Reb Yaakov sounds like he's saying. Else, why are they there?
Okay.
Maybe they're there for the Ruchani effect because of the zodiac, the Ashbaot Ruchaniyot.
Right. Okay, excellent point. I was just going to bring this up. Excellent point. In other words, there is in Chazal, what you're saying is in Chazal, that the zodiac, they have influence upon us, right? Which, of course, according to the Pashup Shad in this Gemara, you have to say that already, because May Rose, if it's a star, and God is cursing the star, or not God, but Dvorah is cursing the star, or that means that star could have helped the Jewish people in some way. Else, why are you cursing it? So, but the zodiac is also true, that born under a certain, I don't know if you call it a star or they call it something else. Do they call it a star, or they call it born under
the planets? There's the planets and the stars.
Right. So
installations.
Chazal would talk about this, that it really is, there really is something to it. And the Gemara says, if you're born under this planet, so then I guess when this planet is strongest or something, then you're going to be a bloodthirsty person. You should become a shochet, right? So these are Gemaras already and Chazals already.
That's Mars again. Ma'adim.
That's Mars, right? Ma'adim, right? The red, right? Is Mars actually? There's something red about Mars?
Yes.
Oh, it is.
It is red. If you look at Mars, if somebody points out to you Mars in your sky, you'll see it has a kind of an orangish kind of color.
Okay.
The soil is essentially rust.
So the truth is that Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky brings it up. But I remember Reb Yaakov talking about this go back to Reish Dalet in the bottom. He says, "Ve'elach shosal divrei Rabbeinu shem ein bechira liyoshvei meroz im keimadu mekalam hanavi al shelo bo la'ezrat Hashem ki kvar motzanu ki yotzu b'zeh etzel matatron." There's a malach. Matatron is actually a good malach. We have in our world, we have good malach and bad, the wicked witch of the east, the good witch of the west, right? We have lahavdil, stuff like that. And Matatron, the Gemara there in Chagiga, that's where Acher got into trouble, according to one opinion. He came and he saw Matatron, I think, sitting. He was Nichnas Lepardes, that's the Gemara over there, and he saw him sitting, and he said, there's no such thing as sitting and standing in that world. So how could he be sitting? It must be, there's two Rishuyot. right? There's God and there's Matatron. But Matatrom's really, and he gets punished, Matatron, for it, because he threw Acher off, even though he's really a good, if you look at many of the Chazals, he's really a good Malach and not one of these bad Malachim, right? The Ashmedai is considered a not good Malach, but Matatron is considered good. But Rabbi Yosef
why did Rabbi Yosef have to go for such an obscure example and not just go for the Malachim by Sodom?
Oh, so he brings that, of course, as well. He brings that. Right? Correct. He shows a lot of places. And then he actually points out there's a Radak that talks about an animal getting schar for helping a human being. Okay, even an animal pashtus doesn't have bechira.
Dogs get
yes. They'll get schar if they helped out a human being. In other words, what it sounds like is it doesn't matter whether they have bechira or not. If they bit the human being, they're going to get an onish. If they help the human being, they're going to get schar. The Radak proves it from a pasuk and say from Malachim. Maybe we'll go into it at a different point, right?
So the whole universe is very helpful to human beings. I heard this actually from Eichel Torah that the more our knowledge grows and the more power that we have, okay, so Hashem has also given us knowledge to see that the universe is like millions and billions of times bigger and larger and more powerful than us.
Right.
But if all we saw was like us and maybe a few planets around us, then it wasn't anything else, then we would really feel like we were kings. But now we feel like we're a speck of dust in the universe.
Correct.
So that's a Ruchnius effect of all this.
So that should really humble us.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, got it.
Okay, so where are you going to be reading from right now?
Okay, so I'm going back now. I just went back to that for a second because I just wanted to bring out that the Malachim get punished even if they don't have free will. Okay. That's a whole discussion itself. But it seems that, in other words, when a Malach finally does what he's supposed to do, and it's a bad thing or a good thing, there is a schar v'onish on that, whether or not he has the bechira or not. So that's why Meroz, didn't have a choice, but they could still get a cursed because at that point, by the way, if I'm not mistaken, the Gemara says Meroz was the Sar of Sisro, the Malach HaSar of Sisro, right? So that's why he's in it for Sisro. He wants Sisro to be victorious. Okay, so that's why he didn't come. That's why he didn't fight. Not come, but that's why he didn't fight because I think Dvorah says that here. There's a place I think where she says that not only did the people fight, but the planets fought as well. Here, where is that?
Yeah, she says that.
She says it, right?
Yes.
Yeah, right. So I don't find it right now for the second, but she does say that. So in other words, there are, the planets get involved with the war, right? In some shape or form. In other words, that, maybe, the meteors, get fallen from there, whatever it's, because it sounds like that war was a war that there was more than meets the eye there. Okay. So you have to say that, yes, it's the sorrow shell, like there's a sorrow shell Esav, the sorrow shell Sisra, the Gemara says. I don't remember if the Gemara says or Rashi and the Rishonim say it. Maybe the Rishonim say it, but there in the Gemara Mod Katan. So he was on Sisra's side, but okay, so he has to be punished for that. Okay. So he says, and then he says, where do we leave off? Yeah, the alti ta'a. That's in Reish Tesvav at the end, right? The last line on the page. Alti ta'a lomar she'ula yesh olamot acherim. Maybe there are other worlds. No sofim al olamenu. Maybe there are other worlds. V'chol ma she'amru chazal u'rak b'negei olamenu. Chazal, when they were talking, they talk about our world because they don't really know what's going on in the other worlds. Al derech shayabore olamot umachrivam ad shaboret olam anochachi. As we know, there's a Chazal that says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was bore olamot. Rabbi Yaakov's going to quote it here, and then he destroyed them because he wasn't happy with them. Ki adarabah sham b'medrash ne'amar amar abo melamed shayabore olamot umachrivam ad shaboret elu. God would teaches us, Rabbi Bo said, teaches us that God would create worlds and destroy them until he created these. I guess the these means the world and whatever's in our world. Omar Dain Hanayan Li. Okay, Yashon Lo Hanayan Li. These make me happy. What we have in this world now would make me happy, right? Hana, give me pleasure. And the other ones, the other worlds didn't give me pleasure. Amrei Pinchas, time of the Rabbi Abo, Vayal Kim es kol asherasa, right? Doesn't say Vayal Kim es asherasa, es kol asherasa. That means all the others. That's what he says. Vehine, this one, Tov Ma'od. Hine means not just behold, but it means Hine, this one is Tov Ma'od. Dain hanayin leave yasol lo hanayin li'ayin sham. V'ratzalomar shekol ma shabora hayi kidei lagia ukachanu l'olam shalanu. Everything God created was to get to this perfect world. Of course, the obvious question is God could have done that in one shot. What is he? He's trying things out over here. It doesn't work. He tries another one, right? He said, "Baruch yochel livro davar sholei milachatchila." Obviously, he could have created a perfect one lechatchila. Elikamosha kosev ba'avos reish perakei, right? The famous Mishnah, Basar Mamoris Nivra Olam Ma Talmud Lomer V'Lo B'Maimer Echad Yocheli Boros, right? He could have created in one Mamar. Why Vayomer Eser Pamim, right? Eli Porim in Rishayim Shema Abdim It Olam Shenivra Basar Mamoris. Right? In other words, to give more schar to the tzaddikim and punishment to the Rishayim Dahainu. To let us know, this all lets us know, right, that in other words, God could have created it, but he wanted us to know that our world is the perfect world. And it took a while to create that. Even though God could have done it in one, he did it in more than one, so we would know that in order to get to perfection, you have to try and try again and try again. By the way, Rav Soloveitchik has a long piece on this. Many years ago, he said it, mamish, probably 70 years ago, 60 years ago. He has a drasha that he says in there. He talks about the mitzvah of alachta b'drachav. And Rav Soloveitchik says people make a mistake to think alachta b'drachav is mahu racha mafatoracha, mahu chan mafatochan. He says it includes everything God is, right? Ma Hashem yotzer hakol af anachnu tzrichim liyotzrim. We have to also be yotzrim, just like God created, right? So he says the idea that God created worlds and destroyed is for us to know, because again, he asks, God could have done it in one shot. He says, man has to know that even if his world is destroyed, he has to rebuild it. That's the yesod. That's acting like God. If someone destroys our world, meaning the Holocaust, we have to rebuild it. We have to have resilience, right? And rebuild it. That's where Soloveitchik talks about over there. And he mentions this Chazal to say that that's why God actually did it in this way. So we know that to get to a perfect world, sometimes the worlds have to be destroyed. And sometimes we just have to keep rebuilding till we get to the perfect. And that's what Reb Yaakov basically says here. He says, the Hainu sheneda olameinu nishtachlel ad shenasa la'olam sholem she'olav nismana adam lovilo to l'tov v'shekabel schar tov al kiyam ha'olam. Okay? So Reb Yaakov says that you shouldn't think that there's other worlds. There could be other worlds, but not worlds that have Bechira Chavshis. You're not going to find that in another world people are sitting and studying a law that God gave them, whether it's a Torah or another law, right? You're not going to find that. That's Mars. It was obviously created for certain matters that we need, even though Reb Yaakov doesn't know what they are. But he says, Kimo kosha kochavim. They do have influence on us, and that Daniel Michaels pointed out, right? Even the Gemara admits they have influences, right, on us. Just like you need birds and bees, you need the madim. Ve'im yesh bruim ala madim, az gam otam tzrichim b'shveleinu. And if we do find people on Mars, that means we need those people. They just can't have free will. But if God created people on Mars, you have to know it's not an accident, right? God wanted those people on Mars because they could be helpful for us. The only thing is, Reb Yaakov doesn't really know. He doesn't say he doesn't know, but it sounds like he doesn't really know what kind of help they could be, right? But they could be some sort of help. This gets into the more the science fiction world, right? When you get these different fellows coming from different planets, and all of a sudden, and they're here to help Earth, right? You know what I mean? That's a little bit like the Twilight Zone, right? So that's what Reb Yaakov basically says. The yesod of Reb Yaakov is you can't have it; doesn't bother him, right? Now,
Rabbi Shurin.
Rabbi Shurin?
Yeah.
Can I ask you two questions?
Sure.
First of all, do you happen to know whether Rabbi Kamenetsky came up with the Shtickle Torah only after 1969 when the man landed on the moon, or he had been saying this before that happened? Because I know that you told me once that when we landed on the moon, Rav Yaakov said, "Now we know that there's a Rambam that can't be correct," and other conclusions. Like,
so that's the piece I gave you with Reb Yaakov's Ksav Yad, right? I wanted to make sure you have the Ksav Yad because what he's about to write is, interesting. And in Chumash, when they quote this until he reprinted the Chumash that Max speaks about, right? He hid it. He hid something, but I'll show you in that. But I have a feeling you're right. In other words, I think if you take a look when this piece was written about Mars and Meroz, right? I didn't look it up now, but I have a strong feeling that it was after the moon landing. Okay.
You can tell from the Machberot of the Ktav Yad exactly what date he wrote these things.
Right, because he puts the date on, right? I told you the only problem with it is he doesn't give you the year each time, right? So you got to look at the beginning at Tishrei to find out the new year. So I'm going through hundreds of papers to find out.
Okay.
What the year is.
So that way, when you mention the Ksav Yad, that brings me to my second question.
Go ahead.
You have repeatedly over these shiurim warned us that a Rabbi Neustadt from Detroit, sometimes when he makes this edition, puts in a little bit of his personal opinion, more than what Rav Kamenetsky actually wrote. So since this is really, we're in Star Trek and Lost in Space here. How exact or how much of this piece? I'm not talking about the footnotes, but the piece itself. How much of it can we attribute directly to Rav Yaakov and to the possibility that Rav Neustadt is
different? This isn't Rav Neustadt.
This piece is on Nach that I'm reading you, and on Nach, Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky was very loyal to Reb Yaakov.
Rav Neustadt is only involved in the Chumash.
Only the Chumash, right? Okay. And I'm going to show you when we do the Reb Yaakov from the Ksav Yad, how in the old Chumash, he tries to hide something. And the new one, he finally admits he made a mistake. He doesn't say it, but he changes it back the way it's supposed to be. Now, I have to tell you, the piece that we have from Reb Yaakov is a very short piece. Reb Yaakov tended to write very short because he didn't have the time, and that is.
Viking landed on Mars in 1976, so Yaakov was around then.
He was around.
So Yaakov was around when we landed on Mars.
Yeah.
I have a feeling that, and Reb Yaakov was still writing. Okay, I have a feeling. You mean when a robot landed on Mars, correct?
Correct. Yes.
Okay, so this could actually be, if I'm not mistaken, I did check this, the one we're about to read, and it's in Tufshin Mem. Okay, Mem Nun Samach Ayin Pei. That's 40.
1980. It's 1980.
Right, 1980. Right, so that's after you're saying they landed on Mars, right?
4 years
Correct.
later.
4 years later. Okay, so I mean, this is going to talk about the moon. And when I showed Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky this piece from the Ksav Yad, he wondered about it. He said, I don't understand it. Reb Yaakov told me this piece 15 years before Tufshin Mem. When did we land on the moon? In 1969, right?
Right.
Yes.
Right. Reb Yaakov said this piece to Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky, I think in 1974, 75, right? But this one is in 1980. So Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky wanted to know if there's an earlier piece, and Reb Yaakov just forgot and he rewrote it, which sometimes does happen. And sometimes it's good that it happens because Reb Yaakov writes it a little bit different because he forgot what he wrote, right? Which we get something more out of it. He may bring a different proof, or something. But this is a famous piece, okay, which I remember. This is 1980, right? Much later, right? But I remember Reb Yaakov. Let me just say something else. The Reb Yaakov starts here with a Rambam, page 2120, right? You see that? I wrote page 4, but 2120. He starts with a Rambam. And I explain to you why. Because Reb Yaakov was learning Rambam then. If you'll check, you'll see he's going in order of Rambam as he's writing his Ksavim. Whenever he has something new to say, he writes it. So he wasn't writing about the moon. And he wasn't writing about, something else or something, right? He was writing about Rambam. And he reminded himself that he had problems with a certain Rambam. And it got answered up, right? And it had to do with the moon landing. So he wrote it over here. But Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky could be right. I just got to keep checking because this is 2120, right? That's 2,120 pages. I got to look before that to see if Reb Yaakov wrote it already before. Now, that's not so easy to do. I have to tell you, sometimes it can take me a month, okay, to do that. So I do it slowly, like 300 pages a time, and then you can get to it, right? So we're going to learn this piece, and then I'm going to check if there's an earlier piece as well, okay? Because I remember Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky asking me, like, why is he writing it now? Okay, and the reason I think he's writing is because he's writing on the Rambam, and he reminded himself about this. Okay, so he says Rambam Perek Dal Mehilchos Yesodei HaTorah Halacha Gimel. Okay, and he writes like this: V'Inyonei Daled Prokim Elu. The Rambam writes the 4 Prokim. The Rambam is writing in Perek Daled at the end, right? Sure. Perek Daled, and he says. These 4 prokim that I wrote, they call these prokim, they would call these prokim pardes. V'hine b'mishna reish perek beis de chagiga daf yud aleph amid beis amru ein dorshim. The Mishnah says of it ein dorshim b'maisa breishis b'shtayim, only with 1, right? Okay, in other words, the Rambam says that these 4 chapters. Now, the part of these 4 chapters discusses 5 mitzvahs. The Rambam has 5 mitzvahs here: Yiras Hashem, Avos Hashem. Obviously, he's getting that from the Torah. But chapter 3 and 4, if I remember correctly, in Yesodei HaTorah, chapter 3 and 4. Right? Chapter 3 starts, Hagalgalim v'heinam nikram shamayim v'rakiyu zvul v'arvos v'hem tisha galgalim. And then he starts talking about basically Maisa Bereshis, okay? And then he talks about, he talks about, what do you call that? 4 parts of Eish, Mayim, right? What is that called?
The 4 elements.
4 elements, right? So Rambam talks about that, right? And then at the end, right, where Reb Yaakov is quoting is what he says at the end, Vinyone Arba Prokmela here he says it. Vinyone Arba Prokim Elu Shebechamesh Mitzvos Elu, 5 mitzvahs in these 4 prokim. Hem Shecham Rishonim Korimoto Pardes. Okay? Meaning, I don't think Rabbi Yaakov was saying the 4 prokim all is something different. He means that when the Rambam discusses Maisa Bereshis, so to speak, the world, the Galgalim, the Shamayim, the Aretz. So so here's where Reb Yaakov comes in. He says, Imkain, that's the 3rd line. Al koch shelo nichtevu inyanim elu ela nimtzeru bal peh mi pelozin. Al korchach, right? They never wrote these things down. If Maisa Bereshis, you're not allowed to give over except one guy, one fellow at a time, right? Obviously, you don't write it down because everyone's going to read it, right? Right? Shelo nichtevu inyanim elu ela nimtzeru bal peh mi pelozin. Harivade shekol daled prokim ela heim einem mitorah shebal peh haksuva. You have to say when the Rambam's talking about Maisa Bereshis, he doesn't mean the Maisa Bereshis of that Mishnah that says Maisa Bereshis, you can't teach even with 2. He can't mean that because that you wouldn't write down because everyone would read it then. So he says, Elam Prokem Elu, one second, Ksuva, Ela Kosav Koldala Prokem Elu Midaito HaRechava. He wrote this because of his breadth of knowledge, his mind and his breadth of knowledge. Mitoch Yidios B'chochmas Chitzonius Kolomar Shalom Mechochmas HaTorah. These is because he knew Chochmas Chitzonius means sciences. He knew secular things as well. The books he studied for medicine, he didn't get that necessarily from the Gemara. He got it from medical books, or in science he got from science books as well. Kolomar, Shalom Chachmas HaTorah. Omeyat, in other words, he didn't get it from there. He got it, in other words, from outside sources. Chachmas Chitzonius, outside sources. Umeyata, and here's the famous Reb Yaakov, Daiti Nacha. My mind is calm. If I say that the Rambam got the 2 chapters, Gimel and Dalet and Hilchos Yesod Torah, from outside sources and not from Chazal, right? My mind is calm. Why? Mashenitzta'arti acharei roi shalavane guf achar. After I had pain, when I saw my seeing, I saw that the moon is a real, what do you call it? A guf achar means a real mass, right?
A lump of rock.
What?
A lump of rock.
A lump of rock. That's a good way of saying it, right? So I was mitztaer. For Rambam Kosef, b'perek gimel halacha tes, kol hakochevim v'agalgalim, heim, that's the next page, heim balei nefesh v'dei v'aseichel. He says that they are balei nefesh, dei v'aseichel, heim. Right? Now, Reb Yaakov tells you to look there because that's not exactly what bothered Reb Yaakov. What bothered Reb Yaakov is, one second, this is in chapter Gimel Halacha Tes. I don't see it here. One second. Maybe it's before. Wait, hold on.
But I don't understand, why is Datam Nocha when his worldview just got blown up because the Rambam says the moon is a spiritual entity and he just found out that it's a
Right.
lump of
So
rock.
that's in chapter 2 is where he says the moon's a spiritual entity and not a physical entity. So what is he saying? Where did the Rambam get that from? Al Korch, he got it from outside sources and not Chazal, because the Maisa Bereshis of Chazal he couldn't give over in writing because that has to pass on one person at a time. Chacham Mevim Midaito. Right? So obviously the Rambam got that from Greek philosophy or somewhere else, correct? So Reb Yaakov says, now it doesn't bother me. The Rambam could be wrong. The Rambam can't be wrong when he's getting things from the Talmud, right? That's what Reb Yaakov actually said to Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky. When he met Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky, he told him over this, he said, if the Rambam could be wrong in Hilchos Yisod Torah, why can't he be wrong in Hilchos Shabbos? Right? But he comes to the conclusion Hilchos Yisod Torah is not based on the Maisa Bereshis, is not based on the Torah. Else the Rambam couldn't reveal it. So it has to be based on outside sources. The Rambam's philosophy that he studied. Oh, if it's the Rambam's philosophy, then there's no problem. Then there's no problem.
So how could the Rambam call it Hilchos? Halachas. It's not halachas.
Right? You mean?
And would Rabbi Yaakov have learnt it in the bathroom?
That's a good question. I have a feeling he would probably tell you yes. Now, I want to say, be very clear that within Hilchos Yisod Torah, right, there is mitzvos as well in between. But if you're talking only about those halachas where it says, right, about Maisa Bereshis, right, I think he would learn that in the bathroom, especially now. Right,
yeah, but I find it very strange.
But David's question is a pretty good question, right? The Rambam calls it halacha aleph, halacha bet, halacha gimel. Now he said it doesn't say the word halacha aleph and bet. We call it halacha aleph and bet. All it says is aleph bet gimel dalet. Right? We're the ones who say halacha. We decided. So Reb Yaakov would say to you, these are you wouldn't call halacha. You would call it aleph bet gimel dalet. By the way, I'm going to give you a little bit of background where Reb Yaakov was coming from. Originally, Reb Yaakov didn't think of this. Only when he got desperate about the moon. I just want to point out that he says, Acharei ro'i shalavana, right? So after my seeing of the Levana, of the landing on the Levana, right? Shalavana hi guf achor. After my seeing. So why does
an even stronger language? He says shenitz ta'arti. Right,
it's ta'arti when I saw it. Now that means Reb Yaakov saw the moon landing. Now Rabbi Daniel Neustadt changes it to Acharei Ra'inu because he doesn't want anyone to know that Reb Yaakov saw television. Now Reb Yaakov told me that someone invited him in Toronto to see the moon landing. Someone came to Reb Yaakov and said they're going to be landing on the moon in 10 minutes. Maybe you want to come over and see. And Reb Yaakov said, yeah, I want to see it. Because Reb Yaakov didn't believe it could happen. So he wanted to see it. And then when it landed, that's where Reb Yaakov couldn't sleep for, it was about 3 weeks he couldn't sleep. Okay, it wasn't one night. And then he came up with this idea. And that the Rambam got this not because of that Mishnah in Chagiga that he would not be allowed to write this out, and therefore he got it from other sources, and therefore he could be wrong, right? That and Daniel's question, I think Reb Yaakov would say on these you can learn them in the bathroom, but not of all of Hilchos Yisod Torah, right?
But I don't understand. Reb Yaakov didn't mind saying that Natan HaNavi could make a mistake telling David HaMelech he could build the Beis HaMikdash. Why does he have a problem saying the Rambam made a mistake?
Okay, so he really said why. He said because if the Rambam made a mistake here, again, assuming that the Rambam, he always assumed that the Rambam got this from Gemaras, right? So assuming he got it from the Gemara, right? He felt the Rambam can't make a mistake if he got it from a Gemara. Else we're really in trouble because then all the other halachas we have to question, right?
Is there a Gemara like that?
Okay, so that's why I wanted to give you a bit of background. So that we'll do today, and then we'll stop. I'll tell you what it is. When Reb Yaakov was in Slobodka, he started thinking that even the stuff like the Rambam's diet that he gives us in Hilchos Deos, in Perek Dalet, he gives us a whole diet of the Rambam, which I know recently people have been writing books about, right? Why the Rambam knew what he was talking about and this and that. I've seen mamish books where people say the Rambam's diet, okay? So Reb Yaakov told his Avrusa, who's from Dvinsk, that he's positive that the Rambam got that from Gemaras, that diet. And he started writing a commentary on Hilchos Deos, okay, where the Rambam, where he shows the sources of the Rambam. Now, I don't know if he ever finished it, right? He did write a commentary on the Rambam that got lost, so maybe that was part of it. But he said, I started writing it. Now, when my Chavrusa went home for Pesach, I said to him, ask Reb Meir Simcha, right, the famous Meir Simcha Midvinsk, right, the Meshech Chochma or the Or Sameach, right? Ask him if I can assume that in Hilchos Deos is based on Gemaras, okay, even the diet. And if he says yes, because he was a real expert in Rambam, he wrote the Or Sameach on the Rambam. So then ask him why didn't he write on Hilchos Deos? Yaakov had to say for Or Sameach in Slobodka. He never wrote on Hilchos Deos. Why didn't? Because Rabbi Yitzchak loves to show sources to the Rambam that the Magid Mishnah didn't show, that the Kesef Mishnah showed, the Lechem Mishnah didn't show. He loves to show sources like that. That's his forte, right? So he tells, Reb Yaakov says, the guy comes back after Pesach and says, I asked for the Meir Rebbe Simcha, and he said he was going to write because he feels Reb Yaakov is right, okay, that the source of Chazal, but he found a sefer from the Malbim called Artzos HaSholom that the Malbim already wrote on Hilchos Deos all the sources, so he felt he didn't have to do it. Okay, now I went to Moser of Cook and I looked up Artzos HaSholom, and it's a drush sefer of the Malbim, a drushos of the Malbim, and I went back to Reb Yaakov. When Reb Yaakov was here in Israel, I said I got bad news. Artzos HaSholom has drushos; it doesn't have the Rambam Hilchos Deos. And I never forget what Reb Yaakov said to me. I'll never forget it. He goes, "It can't be that the Or Sameach made a mistake. His memory was perfect." Okay, this is what Reb Yaakov didn't hesitate. Can't be. So I went to the university library, and then I found Artzos HaSholom, okay, like I found. But in Artzos HaSholom, in that printing, it has another sefer on Hilchos Deos. The Malbim originally printed it separately, then he printed it together. And that's probably the one the Or Sameach had. Okay? So he didn't really make a mistake, right? Except Moser of Cook had one edition, and the Hebrew University Library had a different edition. By the way, Hebrew University Library had all the editions, not just one. They had all of it. Anyway, what was bringing Reb Yaakov to this was this idea that everything in the Rambam comes from a Gemara. So it can't be wrong. That was his idea. It can't be wrong, right? But once he determined that this Hilchos Yesod Torah did not come from Gemara, he could sleep at night. Okay, that's the idea. Okay, we'll take it up next week again a little bit more because we'll talk. Because I mentioned to you that Rabbi Yaakov says Acharei Roi after my seeing, and Reb Daniel Neustadt in the old Rabbi Yaakov quotes not exactly this piece. I think it's a different piece, and that's why I got to find that piece. It says Acharei Sharainu, right? We saw, because he doesn't want you to know that Reb Yaakov saw the television. Now, I want to tell you something. That was not the only time Reb Yaakov saw television. Rav Hutner was kidnapped by the PLO. The plane was kidnapped to Jordan. Reb Yaakov happened to be in my house. So I asked Reb Yaakov if he wants to see the news. Rav Hutner was very close with Reb Yaakov. And he said, yeah, I want to see the news. And they showed a picture of Hutner, Jonas and David, his son-in-law. Right?
You need to, Rabbi Shurin, you need to clarify that you took the television out of the box that you kept it in to plug it in so you could show him, no?
Well, in my house, the television was always out. Though my father mostly watched the news, except every now and then he watched a Western. Rarely, but he watched it. Why? Because he liked the shtetl. It reminded him of Ritva, the shtetl. So he liked to watch. He asked me, when is Gunsmoke on? he wanted the shtetl. But he didn't watch every one. Once in a while, he watched a Gunsmoke. Okay, we'll take it up next week, guys.
Rabbi
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Can we assume that non-Jews have Bechira Chavshis?
I think we do assume that they have. In other words,
So then-
Shalom Elokim.
Why would Reb Yaakov be bothered if aliens had Bechira? I mean, he said because it's only the Jews that got the Torah that.
Well, I hear your question. I think he holds this is the only planet where people were created Bechira. Don't forget, a guy can become a Jew, right? So there is room for the guy to get a Torah also. So he was created in a way that he could become a Jew. He doesn't have to. He was created in a way he could become a Jew. So he has to have Bechira. But and nowhere else on earth is there going to be such a thing.
Are all the Kisvei Yad scanned like this?
What do you mean?
That they're you have pictures, computers, they're scanned.
Well, I scanned it today, right?
So
I have a photocopy of it.
Because I wonder if there's new AI software that could convert the Kitvei Yad into text that you could search.
Yes.
I'm sure they can. I'm sure you can. I don't even have a suffix, but I'm a little bit on the old-fashioned side. That's the problem. Okay?
Make it easier to find things.
Much easier. If I had the time, I'm sure Daniel Neustadt did something like that. If I asked him, he could come up with it in a second. If I write him, he'll show me, from Yaakov spoke about it somewhere else. He's very advanced in that. But I'm unfortunately not. Okay, guys, see you next week.
Thank you very much.
Go to.